Mark. Let's go. A lot of history to look at today. If you remember, last period, we checked out Neville Shute's book On the Beach, written in 1957, and the 1959 movie based upon that book, starring Atticus Finch and Ava Gardner. If you missed it, you can click up here and you can get caught up. It's not required, but it's a good view. Today, let's look and see when Australia went nuclear again. The 2000 version of On the Beach. Let's go rogue. The second version of On the Beach was produced by Australia's Southern Star Productions and premiered in America as a TV miniseries on the Showtime network on May 28, 2000. The premise this time is the same as in the novel and in the 1959 film. World War III has led to a nuclear exchange in the Northern Hemisphere, which has wiped out life in the North. Australians have only a few months to live before the radiation moves south. But there's a few glimmers of hope. Some physicists believe that the equatorial winds might block the radiation from moving into the Southern Hemisphere, or that rain and snow in the winter in the North will wash the radiation out from the atmosphere before it reaches Australia. Some physicists actually believe that the radiation levels are already falling in the far north, like Alaska. Those people in Australia need to either find out if they'll be able to survive what's coming, or decide how they're going to live the last few weeks of their lives. The 2000 update on the Beach sports a mainly Australian cast. Commander Dwight Towers is solidly played by American actor Armand Assante. He's the commander of the U.S. nuclear submarine USS Charleston that survives the nuclear exchange and arrives in Melbourne. Australian actress Rachel Ward plays a much more inebriated, much more lustful Moira Dickinson. Physicist Julian Osborne is played by another Australian actor, Brian Brown. He's the winner of Australia's Most Likely to Be Confused with Michael Caine award. The side note, Brian Brown is married to co-star Rachel Ward, but in the movie, her love interest is in the Armand Assante character Dwight Towers. It reminds me of that old paramedic series, Emergency. I know the story was about paramedics, but there was this interesting goings-on at Rampart General Hospital. See, Julie London, who played Dixie McCall, was married to Bobby Troop in real life, who played Dr. Early. Dixie's love interest in the series, though, was not her husband's character, rather it was Dr. Kelly Brackett. Also speaking of Brian Brown, when I saw him in the role of Julian Osborne, my first thought was, I hate this guy. He played opposite Tom Cruise in an 80s movie called Cocktail, one of my wife's favorites. Not a fan. Brown's character is despicable. Compared to Fred Astaire in the 1959 version, I mean, come on. Fred Astaire is the postmaster of the North Pole. Brian Brown is either one of the most horrible human beings on Earth, or is a great actor, playing horrible characters. Considering his almost 40-year marriage to Rachel Ward, I'm kind of thinking it's the brilliant actor option. Then again, Rachel Ward. She caused Richard Chamberlain to give up the priesthood in the Thornbirds. I digress. As for the Holmes family, Lieutenant Peter Holmes is played by Grant Bowler, and Mary is played by Jacqueline McKenzie, both Australian actors. Hoping that radiation levels are lowering in the northern regions of the Earth, Towers is ordered to take the Charleston north to the coast of Alaska. The hope of humanity is buoyed by an email coming from Anchorage, but the message is corrupted. And all we can read is, don't despair. The whales have survived. Australian Navy Lieutenant Peter Holmes and physicist Julian Osborne are ordered to go north with Towers on the Charleston. While the boat is being prepared, Towers is invited to a dinner with the Holmes. While there, he meets Moira Dickinson, Mary Holmes' sister. Moira has previously dated Julian Osborne, how convenient, but now decides that she wants to spend the last few months of her life with Towers. In the face of Moira's advances, Towers tells her that, as long as there's a chance that his wife and family survived, he will remain loyal to them. A week later, the Charleston heads north. Off the coast of Alaska, Towers and Osborne discover that radiation levels are not falling. The Charleston then drops anchor in Anchorage, and Towers goes ashore with his XO, Hirsch, to find the source of the mystery email. It is from a news reporter on a disk on a solar power computer drive. A story about whales trapped in a patch of ice, not about whales surviving the nuclear exchange. So it's a good news, bad news proposition. The whales survived, humanity did not. And I guess the whales didn't either. As the two return to the Charleston, Towers goes inside a house and sees a family huddled together, having taken their suicide pills. He thinks of his own family and how they might have died. On the return to the sub, Hirsch tears his radiation suit. The Charleston next drops into San Francisco, which has been struck and turned into a pile of rubble. One of the crew members, Swain, leaves the sub wishing to die in his hometown. He's last seen fishing for a raft, content to live his last few days doing what he loved most. The Charleston then returns to Melbourne. Hirsch, the XO who tore his radiation suit in Anchorage, becomes terminally ill. Towers attends to Hirsch, eventually administering him medication to help him die peacefully. He then returns to the Holmes place outside of Melbourne to find that Moira has had a fling with Julian. Julian leaves Moira to Towers and goes back to Melbourne, taking his Ferrari for one last spin through town, watching the effects of radiation poisoning impacting the city. Before he can be affected, he goes out on the Australian Grand Prix and dies in a fiery accident. When Mary Holmes starts to get sick, Peter and Mary take their suicide pills and die alongside their infant daughter as a family. The crew of the Charleston decide they want to go back to the United States to die rather than dying in Melbourne. Towers takes command of the submarine and walks between the bunks of the rooms, checking on the health of his crew, which is deteriorating quickly. He then orders the ship out of Melbourne Harbor, while Moira watches, getting drunk in her rage toward Towers. Then the commander shows up on the beach in his dress whites, and the film finishes with an embrace between the two. Roll credits. We assume that Towers and Moira have wild, passionate sex on the beach as radiation falls down around them until they die together in one vomitous mass. There are a few differences between the updated version of 2000 and the book and the movie made in the 1950s. Because it is a 3-hour and 15-minute miniseries, the runtime allows for deeper dives into people's relationships. Towers has an almost fatherly relationship with the crew of the Charleston, where the 1959 movie spent no time showing Atticus Finch with his crew. It also spends more time with Towers thinking about his wife and his family. In the 2000 version, the submarine is called the USS Charleston, matching U.S. Navy protocol for naming Los Angeles-class nuclear submarines for cities. Way to go, Dallas! One significant difference in the three versions of On the Beach is how World War III comes about. In the 1957 novel, the war begins with the conventional Warsaw Pact launch of nuclear missiles against NATO. In the 1959 film, a nuclear exchange does occur, but no blame is assigned. Julian Osborne blames Albert Einstein. In the 2000 version, the nuclear exchange is preceded by a Chinese blockade of Taiwan, then a subsequent invasion. An exchange follows between the United States and China. Melbourne is more chaotic in the 2000 version than the 1959 movie. At the beginning of the movie, people still go about their businesses. The trains still run, the phones still run, there's still news reports, but we begin to see chaos in small pockets of the city. When the Charleston returns to Melbourne after its few weeks expedition, we find the city has disintegrated into absolute chaos. Desperation takes hold as more of the cities north of Melbourne have gone black, and people realize that life is short. Looting, assaults, gunplay, rape are common. So, let's go to the history. So why the interest in Australia in nuclear war when the Cold War is essentially over? By 2000, the Soviets are gone, and Russia, under Boris Yeltsin, pre-Putin, had friendly relations with the West. The Chinese have become a more capable military power by 2000, and by its proximity, it is a much more significant threat to Australia than the old Soviet Union. This is why the Aussies purchased 8 nuclear submarines in 2021. And unlike the premise of Neville Shute's book, Australia would not emerge from a nuclear World War III unscathed. It has become fully integrated into an alliance to contain China, who would certainly launch nukes against Australia. The effects of the war would be immediate, not prolonged. The final scenes in the film are different as well. The 1959 version of the film is about the end of mankind. The last shots are in the empty streets of Melbourne, a paper blowing across the street, torn down banner that says, "There is still time, brethren." The nuclear exchange in On the Beach is a vehicle to get the viewer to consider a broader question. It is the romance between Peter and Mary Holmes. It's a romance between Moira and Dwight. The lingering question in the novel and the film is, what do you value? If radiation is moving in your direction, you've only got a couple of days to live, how do you want to die? Where do you want to die? In whose arms do you want to die? Swain chooses to leave the Charleston and spend his last days in San Francisco. The crew of the Charleston choose to return to the United States. Julian Osborne decides to die in the driver's seat of his Ferrari. Peter and Mary Holmes take their suicide pills and die in each other's arms. The end of Dwight and Moira are very different. In the novel and in the 1959 movie, Dwight and the crew head out to sea to scuttle the sub. Dwight remains loyal to his wife. Moira takes her suicide pills and watches the sub leave while sitting on a bluff above the channel. In the 2000 film, Moira watches the sub depart. Then, Dwight ends up climbing the bluff to meet her. And they end up having wild, passionate, radioactive sex on the beach as radiation falls down around them, and they die together, like we said, in one vomitous mass. And roll credits. Hey, thanks for coming by. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. If I did it right, you did both. I had fun. Bronk quit my day job. And the next time nuclear explosions start going off in the Northern Hemisphere and you've got only a couple of weeks before the radiation shows up, hey, remember me. I'm Mark Haggard. I'm a history teacher, and I've gone rogue.